You asked me that. Now it's going.
Yeah, I see a red light.
Yeah.
I'm Bill, or Billy Vernon Carpenter. I was born in Paducah, Texas on July the 30th, 1929. And I grew up around Paducah there on the farms and all around Cottle County. And if you notice, I said 1929. That's the year the Great Depression started. So we, of course, went through all of that, and were able to survive it. We lived on a farm. My dad usually was sharecropping, and we'd go to town about twice a year, as I remember. And of course, everywhere we went with a wagon and team of mules or team of horses. And I'll always remember when we'd go to town in the wintertime because it was so cold in that old wagon. And it didn't matter how many quilts you wrapped up in, that thing was still cold, you know. And usually Dad would walk because he could stay warmer walking than he could by riding in that old wagon. But that's one of the things I remember as a small child was how cold those trips to town were. We moved to New Mexico when I was 8 years old in 1938, in April of 1938. We moved into Dexter down there, and we lived at the Wattenberger place, and we lived in two little one-room shacks that sat on a reservoir bank. And we had the 7-year itch that year. I never will forget it because we'd wear them old long-handled underwear, and Mama'd put that old sulfur and lard on me, and it was awful.
What is a 7-year itch? What is that?
It's just an itch that you get, and they claim that it will. At that time, they'd say, well, you'd have it for 7 years if you didn't get rid of it, and so I really don't know what it was. Just a disease that we got and scratched a lot. But it rained. I remember it rained a lot that year, and it was kind of muddy and messy around there. I never will forget because one day I was out playing, and my dad said, "Come over here. I want to show you something." Well, they had an irrigation well, and it had a big old pump on it, and it had a one-cylinder engine, and that one-cylinder engine would run, and it'd pop every time it'd fire. It'd blow a big smoke ring out of the stack, out of the smokestack that went up from that thing, and the discharge pipe from the well would go out to a reservoir, and the water would run into the reservoir. And there was a wire that ran along that discharge pipe, and on the end of that wire at the discharge pipe was a bucket, and that water was going into that bucket. And Dad took me over there and showed me that, and he said, "Now don't ever mess with that. Leave that alone. Don't ever mess with it." Well, he shouldn't have told me that. Because I never would have noticed the thing if he hadn't told me that. So went on, and 2 or 3 days later, well, I got curious, so I walked over there, and I reached over there and picked up on that bucket. And when I picked up on that bucket, it killed that engine on that. And that thing's not backfiring every time it fires. And I never heard such silence in my life. When that thing went off, it quit running, man, I dropped that bucket and I was in the house before you could say scat. And nobody ever knew that Bill did that. See? But here come the hired hands from the farm, all over that farm, coming in there to see why that pump went off. Scared me to death. Down in the street from us, down the road from us, lived a fellow, a young kid named Bud Workman. And Bud was a couple of years older than I was. And I liked to go down to Bud's house because Bud had some of the nicest toys you ever saw. I mean, he had trucks and tractors and farm equipment that he could play in the dirt with, you know, and I never seen anything like that in my life. And I was so tickled to get to go down there, and I'd go down there every day and play if Mom would let me, you know. And that was a good time. And then we later then moved out west of town, out to what they call the old Tom Bogle place, and we lived in two little bitty rooms in the basement of an old house there, and there was another family lived upstairs. And of course we picked cotton and chopped cotton and all. And I guess CA was born while we lived at the Wattenberger place, because I can remember CA very well, because the thing I remember the most when we lived at the Bogle place, I woke up one morning, CA had hit me right there in the bridge of the nose with a ball-peen hammer. And that's how I remember CA so well, because he was just a little toddler. He just toddled around, and man, he hit me. That hammer sure woke me up, I tell you. And we lived around different farms down the Dexter area. Went to school in Dexter. The first Hispanic people that we ever knew, we lived right next to them at the old Wattenberger place there. And we moved into Dexter then in about 41 or 42, somewhere along in there. And then in 44, we left Dexter and went to Brownfield, Texas, and worked in an ice plant there for about a year. And then we moved over to Denver City, Texas, and ran an ice plant there in Denver City. And while we were in Denver City, I turned 16 that year. And I was in the 10th grade in high school. And me and 4 other guys decided we were going to run off and join the Navy. So we did. I went down to the post office and registered for the draft just like I was 18 years old, and took my registration card. Went to Lubbock and joined up with the Navy. Well, they sent me to San Diego, and I was only in there just over 90 days. Our dad got sick. He had I guess today it would be a brain aneurysm. At that time we didn't know what it was. We just knew he had something wrong with it in his head. And anyway, my mother got me out of the Navy to come home and help take care of the family. And so I worked around Denver City there for a while in construction. And then we moved back to Paducah, to my grandmother's place. And Dad got worse, took bad sick, got down, and eventually died from his injury in 1947. Well, at that time in 1947, now, if you remember, 1947 was when the UFO crashed in Roswell. Well, I lived at that time, and I suppose Mom and them did by by then too, out here on Lawrence Ranch, north of Artesia. But that's another story. That's a story in itself, because when Dad died, Bonnie and Verl came to the funeral, and I came back home with them to get a job. And I went to work on the Lawrence Ranch on the farm out there. And I was making $5 a day. And I was trying to get enough money together to where I could go get Mom and the boys, and Idell was still at home, and bring them out here. Well, we got up one Saturday morning and it was raining. This had been 2 or 3 months, and I wasn't able to get enough money put together to go get them. But this particular Saturday morning, we got up, it was raining, and we couldn't work. Well, they had a big, huge tractor shed out there, and we was all standing around, all the hands was standing around in that tractor shed, waiting for the boss to bring our pay. Of course, we worked 7 days a week generally, so I had $35 coming for a week's wages of $5 a day. But that still wasn't enough to go to Paducah and get Mom and the boys, bring it back out here. Well, somebody, while we were standing around there waiting, we got, the boss brought our checks, and we were standing around there talking, and somebody threw a blanket down on the ground and got out a pair of dice. We went shooting dice, and I won $35, another $35 shooting dice. Well, that gave me enough money with my paycheck and that $35 I won. So I hitchhiked to Brownfield, and my uncle, my mother's brother, lived in Brownfield, so I got him to take his truck, and the money I had, well, we went on down, got Mom and the boys, and brought them back out here then. And that's how we happened to be here in 1947 when the crash happened out north of Roswell. And you know, it's so strange. That's such a big deal today. We didn't even know about it then. And we lived within 30 miles, 40 miles of of Roswell at the time it happened, and nobody even knew it happened. But it's of course a big thing today.
Well, let me ask a few questions, and we'll come
Okay.
back to that period.
Okay.
What was it like for you when your dad died?
Well, it was, of course, a sad time. Dad had gotten in a coma, and we were at my grandmother's, and she lived in a little 3-room house. No, it was actually a 2-room house. Had a bedroom and a kitchen, and we were living there and or staying there with her. And my granddad lived down at Dumont. Him and Granny had been separated for years, and we could go visit them, and they would say, if we went to see Granddaddy first, he'd say, have you been to see your Granny? Well, no. Well, you better go see her. You know, or if we went to see her first, she'd say, have you been to see your Granddaddy? Well, you better go see him, you know, and that kind of thing. They're always concerned about each other, but they wouldn't speak to each other. So when Dad got sick, Granddaddy came to her house to sit with Dad, because Dad was, like I say, was in a coma. Granddaddy walked in the house, and Granny was standing at the stove. And when Granddaddy walked in, he nodded and he said, F. That was my grandmother. Effie was her name. He said, F. And she said, Lander. They spoke to one another. That was the first time in probably several years that they'd spoken to each other. And he walked in and sat down beside my dad's bed and sat there for Well, that was about 3 days. I think Dad died in about 3 days after that. And when he died, why, Essie, that was my granddad's sister. She said she hollered at my mother and said, "Rennie, he's gone." And so that I can remember that because I was laying on the bed across the room there, and when that happened, and of course everybody got up, and wasn't much room in that little old house. A lot of people there, but then my mother and the boys and Idell went back to Dumont and stayed down there until stayed with Granddaddy and Essie until I was able to get the money to get them out to.
Did you have the sense when your dad died? Did you feel like now there's a lot of weight on me to take care of the family?
Well, not any more than there had been because I'd already had it. He hadn't been able to work for over a year at that time, so I already had that. And there wasn't that much work going on. I worked on ranches down there. Worked for the Swenson Ranch, and I'd get my paycheck, which was I was getting $90 a month, and my room and board. That was the pay. And I smoked at that time, so I'd usually take a quarter and buy a carton of Bull Durham tobacco. And that would last me for a month. It was 12 sacks in that carton. And then I'd give Mama the rest of the money to buy groceries with, her and the boys. And of course, I got my room and board there at the ranch where I worked. So pressure, wasn't any greater pressure on me when that happened than before, but I felt like I could go and get a better job and a better paying job at that time when he died. And that's why I came out to this country, because it was paying a little better out here. Of course, the older girls and Leroy were all married and gone. They had their own families, and we had a pretty good time around the Lawrence Ranch there when we was all working there. I remember we getting in a big old dirt fight, clod fight, throwing clods at one another, everything after dark one night. Had quite a time at that. But anyway, I wound up going back. We wound up going back to Paducah after that. And I wound up getting married there at Paducah. Married a girl, and we were married for 3 years. And had a boy named Dennis Ray, and we split up. Well, we had moved to Amarillo, and I was working on the Amarillo Police Department at that time. And when we divorced, and we came back I came to Roswell then, and after she and I divorced, well, I went to Roswell and was living there with Leroy and Francis. And Leroy was floor bouncing at a little night spot out there. We had a barn dance on Saturday night and Wednesday night, and there was no drinking, and they didn't sell drinks, but of course everybody had a bottle usually. But anyway, I would go with him. I'd go out to that barn dance, and that's where I met Nona. And she had her hair was long and straight and had it in a ponytail. And so we danced around there. I danced with her and another or two, and was over talking to Leroy, and he said, well, he pointed out all these girls, and he said, well, Bill, pick you out one. Which one you want? I said, I'll take the one with the ponytail. And he said, well, that's Nona. He knew her name. So anyway, I went over and asked her to dance, and we started, and that's how we met. And that's when she caught me, laid a trap for me. And But we had great times going together. We'd go together for a week and split up for two and fuss and fight and had a great old time, you know. And then my divorce came through, and Uncle Sam drafted me into the Army. Mm. So they sent me to Fort Bliss, Texas, and I was down there for 8 weeks, and then I came home for 2 weeks. And we got married while I was home for that 2 weeks. And after my 2 weeks was up, well, I went back to El Paso, and she went with me. And she got her a. Did you get a job in El Paso? And but anyway, I would every night when I'd get off at the base, I could go into El Paso. And we always liked to dance. We were quite the dancers, and we wasn't much on drinking, but we did a lot of dancing. And we found a little old place in the basement on a side street there in downtown El Paso. And we went in to that place and sat down at a table, and we'd sat there for, I don't know, a few minutes, and this fiddle player started playing The Devil's Dream was the name of the song, and it's a real fast polka. And of course that was just right down our alley, so we hit that dance floor polking, dancing a polka. And we looked around, and everybody else had got out of the way, and we were just took over the floor. And you know, we were out there. We would go down there just every few nights. We'd go to that place. And from that night on, when we walked through the door into that joint, that old boy would cut down on that Devil's Dream. Every time we'd walk in the door, he'd start playing that song. And we really did enjoy that. Had a good time. Then they sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington for reassignment to the 6th Army. And when I got up there, I called her and told her I was going to Fort Lewis, Washington, to the 6th Army, to be reassigned to the 6th Army. And she said, well, I'm going home then. She was going to go to Sparta Butte, Oregon. And as things happened, well, I got to Fort Lewis, and she caught a bus and went to Oregon to Sparta, and went to her mom and dad's place. And the day that she got in there, her sister Barbara and her husband Bill Stoltz came in to the house. And they visited a while, and when they got ready to leave, they were going to Pasco. They had just moved to Pasco, Washington. And they told her, said, why don't you come go home with us? And she said, okay, I think I will. She just picked up her suitcase, and they got in the car and went to Pasco, Washington. Well, at Pasco, Washington, there's also the two others called the Tri-Cities, Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland. And at Richland is Camp Hanford, Washington, an Army base. And she said, I think I'll call, when she got to Pasco that night, she said, I think I'll call
That's okay. Let's see who we got here.